Hey everybody, it's Brandon again. Today I wanted to talk about why I decided to make comics. And hopefully I can share some thoughts that can help you make some of those big decisions in your life too. Let's check it out. All right, let's get started. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about why I decided to make comics. And generally I want to talk about, I guess, my philosophical approach to making decisions, and how that's led me to where I am today. Um, I should say that this philosophy has been based on a lot of bad decisions. So maybe that means I've got a bad track record. But hopefully I've been able to learn from some of those mistakes and get things pointed in the right direction. So I've had a very circuitous route to making comics. I've always known I wanted to make art, but I had a very difficult time strategically focusing on where and how I was going to make that happen. Um, my daughter was recently reading Raina Telgemeier's Smile, and she showed me this section where Raina is asked what she wants to be when she grows up, and she answers an animator, but in her mind she's thinking a mermaid because she just watched Little Mermaid, and that like comes actually way too close to describing my experience with watching Little Mermaid and wanting to be an animator. So for many years, being a Disney animator was my dream job, and that dream job is kind of morphed. I mean, there was time when I thought, oh, Pixar would be the best ever, or maybe working at Blizzard, or we're doing series animation at Cartoon Network. And the common thread to a lot of these dreams was wanting to work at a AAA studio, working at the best place with the best artists. And honestly, I think I've applied for some position at all of the studios I've mentioned without any success. So flash forward many years later, and somewhere along the way, that ambition has changed. I'm no longer trying to get a job in one of those big studios. I'm trying to make my own comics. So, why did that change? Why did my dream job change? Well, first, I guess part of it is that I failed. I didn't have what it takes to get in clearly, and I didn't try hard enough. I don't think I applied to either any of these studios more than a couple of times. So maybe there's a little bit of sour grapes behind it. I decided to focus my attention elsewhere since I really wasn't getting anywhere trying to get into those AAA studios. But I also had the experience of working with large studios in a different way. I worked 3 years with EA Games, 3 years with Disney Interactive, and although these places weren't technically AAA studios, they gave me quite a bit of insight into what it was like to work in a larger studio, and possibly what it would be like to work at one of these AAA studios. First of all, working in a top tier studio will absolutely give you incredible experience. While Disney Interactive may have not been technically considered a AAA studio, the art talent there was top tier. I mean, there were artists there that I would put up against anyone else in the field. So I definitely experienced this idea of getting better as an artist at Disney Interactive, just by working around like such amazingly talented people. I grew and learned so much, and it just made me push so much harder. Kind of one of the interesting things is too that when you're around a lot of really talented people, it really pushes you not just to try to keep up with them with the things they do well, but it really pushes you to kind of figure out your own niche. You'll like I found for myself that working there, I really was motivated to say, what do I do well that no one else here really does well? Which honestly wasn't very much. Everyone there was there's almost nothing that I could use to stand out from that group, but it helped me to try to focus on what things did I do well, and really focus on getting better at the stuff that made me unique as an artist. So that was a really awesome experience and really helped me grow. Um, and the other thing you get from working at a AAA studio is just the reputation. I mean, if you have Blizzard or Disney or Pixar on your resume, it's going to be awesome for your ego, and it's going to be awesome for your hireability. It's going to open doors for you. You're going to get other jobs because of it, and really, you're going to be a much better place for the rest of your career with those names on your resume. Again, I was at two smaller branches of big studios like EA and Disney, but still, those two names on my resume have opened a lot of opportunities for me. So you definitely get those two big benefits. You get the experience of getting better as an artist. Um, You get kind of just the name on your resume. So those are reasons enough to work for studios like that. Um, so what will you not get from those studios? Well, large studios are not the greatest place for you really to create your art. And I mean the art and the stories that you want to tell and that are part of your personality. Um, there are some people that are able to land those positions where they can make a big creative mark on the voice of the studio, but those positions are pretty rare and well guarded. So, big studios are full of very creative, intelligent, ambitious, egotistical people, and they're all jockeying to have their voice heard and have their imprint on the final product. So, if you want to be the guy that is the creative director or the showrunner or lead story artist, you're going to have to really hustle to get there. And you may have the fight and you may have the hustle to do it. And if you do, go for it and, get to that position where you can have that voice. Honestly, I didn't have the fight in me to do that. Um, so this is kind of what made me realize that dream jobs are kind of symbols of what our dreams really are. When I was young and I saw Little Mermaid, I knew I wanted to be part of something like that, and I knew it had something to do with Disney. And I dreamed about the brand without really considering what it is I really wanted to do. And here's the thing, all this time I was working at other studios, I was always trying to create my own art. I was trying to tell my own stories. And this is part of the reason I never got good at fighting the internal fight at these different studios. I was just too distracted by wanting to make my own art. Um, so now, many years later, I thought my dream was to work at Disney, but it turned out that my real dream was to tell stories. So that's the dream that I'm chasing now. Notice that my dream isn't to tell stories and be rich. It's just to tell stories, and that's just because there's only so much control I have over being rich if I decide I want to tell stories. And this gets me to a really important principle that I wanted to discuss. And this is kind of one of the core principles of this discussion here. I recently finished reading Nassim Taleb's Antifragile, which is a book I highly recommend, a really, really interesting, provocative book. And it introduced me to a decision-making concept that's totally transformed the way I think about decisions. And this is what it is. The upside doesn't matter if you're not okay with the downside. And this is regardless of how high or low risk the decision is. So even if there's a very, very low risk of downside, if you are not okay with the downside, the upside doesn't matter. So the classic example of this is Russian roulette. You hold a gun to your head, there's a bullet in one of six chambers, and you spin the chambers and you pull the trigger. And let's say you get paid $1 million if every time the gun doesn't fire, but if it does fire, you die. So in this case, the downside is totally unacceptable. It doesn't matter what the upside is if you are not willing to put a bullet through your head. Now, like I said, the level of risk is irrelevant as long as the downside is unacceptable. So let's imagine you had a gun with 1,000 chambers and you made $1 billion each time you fire the gun. The risk is still unacceptable. If the chance happens that the worst case scenario happens, you're dead. You don't want to take that risk. The upside doesn't matter if you are not okay with the downside. So let's bring that to just talking about the decision that I made to make comics. And I'm going to kind of compare two paths I could have taken within the recent years. Path number one, I continue making concept art for video games. Path number two, I make comics. Let's look at the upside of making video games. I could keep working my way up to art director or maybe even creative director. I could have a large impact in the creative direction and leave my mark. I could create a project that's really creative, inspiring, where I get to have a big say in what it is, and I have my name on the box and people recognize me as a guy that's an innovator within games. I would get regular salary. I would get benefits. I could eventually make enough that I could retire and I could take off time to do my own art, and then I could make comics. So that's a great upside. Here's the downside. The studio I work for could close. I could get laid off. I wouldn't be able to get hired. I would be so consumed by my work that I would never be able to make my own art. I could work really hard and it may not pay off. I may not get promotions. I may not get the art director, that creative director role. I might not have the financial independence to make my own art, or by the time I did, I'd be too burned out to make the art I want to, or I would die before I ever got the chance. Okay, so let's compare that to making comics. Upside to making comics. I make comics. They are commercially successful and I have carte blanche with what art I want to make. I'm able to cross over to different media. I could even go back to games or animation and be involved in some interesting games or animation project. And I have a greater leverage and I have voice because I own a brand that's valuable. What's the downside? Downside is I don't ever really make money making comics. But I'm still able to make art that I'm proud of, that is respected by my peers, that can be a legacy I can leave to my children. I spend my life, or at least a decent chunk of it, doing what I love. Um, Financial needs, maybe at some point, necessitate me going back to making concept art. But even in the worst case downside scenario, I will still have the art that I've created. So, to be fair, part of what makes this downside for making comics sound good in my case is that I already have a stable financial plan to make this sustainable for quite a while. I've got a decent amount of savings, and my wife works, and I understand that that's not a luxury that everyone has. So your decision making may be different. You may have some more difficult downsides to deal with if you decide to take that path. But for me, when I compare those two scenarios, it makes the choice easy. And it's the downside that helps me make the choice, not the upside. Just like I said, the upside doesn't matter if you don't want the downside. I'm not okay with the downside of working in games, but I could be very happy with the downside of making comics. It'd be a hit to my ego. I mean, the idea of going through the rest of my life and making a lot of art but never making money. I mean, that doesn't look good on a resume. That doesn't go over well in dinner conversations. It makes it hard to get a mortgage. But I think, taking a hit to my ego is a casualty that I am also okay with. So if you're considering your dream job, or maybe you're considering several different dream jobs, you have to consider the downside. And the downside is way more crucial to helping you make the decision than the upside is. Are you okay with not being famous or rich? Can you be happy just making art that you can be proud of? So this brings me to a final concept, and this is the concept I kind of want to wrap up with. And this is from Jack Kornfield's A Path with Heart. And this is perhaps the best thought experiment you can make when making big life path decisions. And the whole idea of this thought experiment is to imagine yourself on your deathbed. You're dying soon. Imagine who's going to be around you at this time. What things will matter to you at that moment? What would you like to be able to say about your life at that time? So I want to leave you with that. Anyway, if you like this or have any thoughts or insights, please let me know in the comments. Like the video and subscribe to see more stuff like this. That's it, and we will catch you next time.